Well, this is a video I'm glad I get to make. Scotland are going to the 2024 Euros in Germany. This is only the second tournament that Scotland have qualified for in my lifetime. The other was Euro 2020, the one that was held across, well, all of Europe. Now, granted, we didn't fare too well at that tournament, where we lost to the Czech Republic, lost to Croatia, but we did beat England 0-0 at Wembley.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about.
Scotland will play the opening game at the Euros against Germany on the 14th of June. The other two games we'll be playing in our group will be Hungary and Switzerland. However, before we take an in-depth look at how I think Scotland will do at the Euros, let's look first at how Scotland actually got to the Euros. So, who's going to be competing at Euro 24? Well, no pun intended, but there are 24 nations competing. The first 20 nations will be the teams that finish first and second from the qualifying groups, of which there are 10. The 21st team will be Germany. As the host nation, they automatically qualify. And the final 3 teams to take it up to 24 will be the 3 teams that progress from the Nations League playoffs that don't automatically qualify. If that sounds complicated, it is. I will try and explain it later in this video. So, how do the qualifying groups work? Well, there's 10 groups named alphabetically from A through to J, and the way each team is drawn into these groups is through what pot they sit in. There are 6 pots, pot 1 being the best, pot 6 being the worst. Pots 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 all have 10 teams in them. Pot 6 only consists of 3 teams, Andorra, San Marino and Liechtenstein. Now this is where our first complication comes in, because out of the 10 groups, 7 of them have 5 teams and 3 of them have 6 teams. Each group gets 1 team from each pot, and because there's only 3 teams in pot 6, that means only 3 groups have 6 teams. Now, I'm not sure what system UEFA uses to decide what groups get 6 teams and what groups only get 5, but for the ease of this video we're going to just ignore that because Scotland got in a group of just 5 teams, so we'll just pretend they don't exist. Scotland were the Group A's pot 2 team. Pot 1 consisted of the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Croatia, Denmark, Portugal, Belgium, Hungary, Switzerland and Poland. Now, being in pot 2, that means we can't face any other teams in pot 2, which meant thankfully Scotland were able to avoid some pretty big hitters, such as France and England. Our options from pot 3 included the Ukraine, Iceland, Norway, Slovenia, the Republic of Ireland, Albania, Montenegro, Romania, Sweden and Armenia. Pot 4 consisted of Georgia, Greece, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Luxembourg, Azerbaijan, Kosovo, Bulgaria, the Faroe Islands and North Macedonia. And finally, pot 5 consisted of Slovakia, Northern Ireland, Cyprus, Belarus, Lithuania, Gibraltar, Estonia, Latvia, Moldova and Malta. So, who did we actually end up in a group with? Well, out of the options from pot 1, there aren't really any teams that you particularly want. But if you had to pick, I suppose we could have said we wanted Hungary or Switzerland maybe would be the ideal teams to get for us. So, did Scotland get either of those teams? No, we got Spain. Of course we did. Now, because it's pot 1, you're basically guaranteed to get a pretty difficult team, regardless of who it was. So, we shouldn't have been too down about the fact we got Spain. However, they would be expected favourites to top the group regardless. Now, looking at pot 3, there's definitely some teams we want to avoid here. The Ukraine are a very good side. Sweden are also a very good side. And of course, the big one would be Norway, seeing as they have both Erling Haaland and Martin Odegaard in very, very good form. There are also teams here ideally we would have liked to get, maybe the likes of Armenia, Albania, Montenegro, supposedly weaker sides on paper. But I mean, we got Spain in pot 1, they were one of the hardest teams, so of course we'll get an easier team this time. Yeah, of course it's fucking Norway, that would make sense. Pot 4's where things start to get a little bit easier. I mean, there's not a lot of really good teams in this. The teams you want to avoid are probably Greece and Turkey. However, if we were to draw the likes of the Faroe Islands, Luxembourg, Kazakhstan even, we could be looking pretty good. Shout out as well to probably North Macedonia and Georgia. They're not amazing sides, but they do have some pretty good players. But finally Scotland drew one of the easy teams in the group. Nope, it's Georgia. Okay, not the worst. And as for pot 5, I mean, basically anyone except Slovakia. And for once we actually got, an easy team on paper, Cyprus. Yeah, we'll take that. So, this was Scotland's group for the Euro qualifiers. Now, let me explain a little bit again about how the qualification works for anyone that's not aware of it. There's 5 teams in this group, everybody plays each other home and away once, so 8 games in total. Now, the playoff bit is where things get interesting. See, the playoff ties are basically determined on how good every country did in the Nations League. It's a tournament league type thing which was held prior to these groups being drawn, and I honestly tried to research this to actually explain how it works, but I'm convinced that no one actually understands it. I'm convinced UEFA don't understand this.
I'm confused. I'm confused right now, G.
So I'm just going to run through every team and basically explain where they stood individually going into this group. Spain won their Nations League A group, so they had already achieved a playoff spot for the qualification should they not finish in the top 2 in this group. However, Spain would be heavy favourites to finish first, worst case scenario second, so they would be expecting automatic qualification. Scotland also won their group in Nations League B, so they, exactly the same as Spain, had a playoff spot in the bank should they fail to finish first or second. However, we would be looking to finish in the top 2 given we actually made the last Euros and our squad's in the best state it's been for maybe over 20 years. So Norway basically had to finish top 2 because they were not guaranteed a fallback playoff spot. They would need results to go their way elsewhere. Georgia were not expected to finish first or second, but they did also have a qualification spot in the bank from winning their Nations League Group C. And as for Cyprus, well, they were there. Scotland's first match of qualifying would see us play Cyprus at Hampden. On paper, this should have been the easiest game we would play in the group. John McGinn would open the scoring in the 21st minute before 2 goals in the 87th and 93rd minute from Scott McTominay. Seeing Scotland end up winning this game 3-0 with Cyprus also having a man sent off in the 95th minute. Scotland's second game in the group would be against Spain at Hampden. We'd be facing the favourites to win the group at home, so it would be a game that you could forgive people for expecting that we would lose. However, this would prove to not be the case. Hampden was absolutely jumping. The Scotland fans were filled with belief and optimism off the back of all the achievements that the national team had made in the last few years. From the first whistle, Scotland showed no fear from playing against the best team in the group. And only 7 minutes in, a mistake from Pedro Porro, so Andy Robertson slipped the ball to Scott McTominay, who made it 1-0. For the rest of the game, Scotland refused to make it any easier for the Spanish. We made it hard for them to control the game and hard for them to play their own game. And in the 51st minute, once again, a goal from Scott McTominay would put Scotland 2-0 up. The Spanish would be unable to come back into the game and Scotland would go on to win 2-0.
That's what I'm talking about. That's why he's the MVP. That's why he's the GOAT. The GOAT.
This meant after the first international break in late March 2023, Scotland sat top of the group with 6 points. Spain sat second with 3 points. Norway and Georgia sat third and fourth with 1 point each, but Georgia did have a game in hand. And Cyprus sat bottom with 0 points, but they also had a game in hand. The next international break was only a few months later, in the middle of June. Scotland's third game overall would be against Norway in Oslo. Another really challenging game given the high quality of players that Norway had in their squad. A win for either side here could give a massive boost in them for trying to finish in the top 2. Half time in this match came and it was still 0-0. Scotland would very much take a draw in this situation. The 61st minute saw Erling Haaland score from the penalty spot after he was brought down in the box by Ryan Porteous. Now, Scotland's fourth game in the group was by far the most interesting. Georgia at Hampden. We'd won 3 from 3 and were sitting top of the group. A 7:45 kick-off saw really nice weather in Glasgow all the way up until about 7:15, where it then changed to torrential rain. Fun fact, I was actually at this game. Because the rain had started so close to kick-off and fans were already pouring into the stadium, the game went ahead as planned. However, had the rain started about 2-3 hours before kick-off, this match 100% would have been called off. The ball could barely move on the surface. Again, within the first 10 minutes, Scotland made a good start. The Georgians did not know how to play in this weather, and Scotland took a 1-0 lead early doors. However, immediately after the game, the officials called a postponement to the match. The Georgian players did not want to continue, they wanted the game to be called off, but UEFA were hesitant because the fans were already in the stadium.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me. Here too much raining.
This match was then postponed for an hour and 40 minutes whilst the ground staff tried to get the park to be more playable. Inside the stands it was brutal. We did not know if the game was going to continue, if it was going to be postponed. However, after an hour and 45 minutes the game continued, and the Georgians, after trying to get the game cancelled in any way they could, looked beat before they had even started playing again. Half-time came and Scotland were still 1-0 up. This was not a great match for the neutral watcher trying to see a good game of football. Just as the second half started, Scotland's top scorer once again, Scott McTominay, scored to make it 2-0 to Scotland. And despite the Georgians getting a penalty in the 94th minute, which they missed, Scotland won the game 2-0, our fourth win from 4, our third clean sheet, 12 points from 12. The next international break was in early September 2023. Scotland had won their first 4 games and their 5th match was away at Cyprus. Now this was a game that realistically we should have been winning. If we did win this game, that would take us to 15 points from 15 with only 3 games left. Meaning that if we could basically win this game, we would be all but qualified for Euro 24. The match started and only 6 minutes in, Scott McTominay stepped up his Ballon d'Or claims yet again by scoring his 6th goal in only 5 Euro qualifiers for Scotland. How has he done that? 16 minutes in and Ryan Porteous made it 2-0 after being played onside from a corner. And in the 30th minute, a peach of a shot from John McGinn from outside the box made it 3-0. Scotland went on to win this game 3-0, made it 15 points out of 15, and Euro 24 was in touching distance. Scotland wouldn't play their 6th game in the group until the following month, on the 12th of October, away at Spain. Now, just quickly, here's how the group looked. Cyprus and Georgia are not really relevant right now, they were far behind everyone else. Scotland sat top with 15 points. Spain sat second on 9 points, but they also had a game in hand. Norway didn't have a game in hand and only had 7 points, so we can basically ignore Spain. Now what this meant was Scotland had 3 games left and we only needed 1 point in order to qualify for Euro 24 in Germany. Equally, if Norway lost or drew any of the remaining games, we were going to Germany. Basically, from this point out, the only way we wouldn't go to Germany is if we lost every game and Norway won every game. Now, on the same night, Norway beat Cyprus 4-0, so they were still in the race. The Spanish wanted revenge, having been beat in Glasgow earlier in the group. They had the better chances throughout the game, but half-time came and it was 0-0. And then it happened. In the 60th minute, Scott McTominay, directly from a free kick close to the corner flag, scored. However, in the celebrations while Scott McTominay was preparing to become First Minister of Scotland, the referee had a VAR check and deemed Jack Hendry to have fouled the goalkeeper in the build-up. I have one thing to say to that referee: fuck you! From here on out, the Spanish ended up winning the game 2-0. A great cross from Jesus Navas to Alvaro Morata seen them go 1-0 up, and then a mistake towards the end of the game by Aaron Hickey to make it 2-0. In the end, probably a deserved win for Spain, Scotland's first loss in the group. However, we would have 2 more chances to get just 1 point to send us to Germany. Now, the loss to Spain was the only qualifier Scotland would play during the October international break. However, 3 days later, on the 15th of October, the Norwegians would play a second game, which they would host Spain in Oslo. Gave scored in the 49th minute and the Spanish went on to win the game 1-0. Norway had dropped points and Scotland were confirmed to be going to Germany for Euro 2024. As for Scotland's remaining 2 games in the group, our second last game was away at Georgia. 2 goals from Kravitskelia were cancelled out by goals from Scott McTominay and a 93rd minute equaliser from Lauren Shankland. Scotland's last game of the group was Norway and Glasgow. The game ended 3 each, goals from John McGinn from the penalty spot, an own goal from Leo Ostigard and Stuart Armstrong. This meant that Scotland finished the qualification campaign with 17 points, 5 wins, 2 draws and just a 1 loss from 8 games. A brilliant qualifying campaign and a hard group sent Steve Clarke's men to Germany. Now, the entire qualifying campaign from Scotland was brilliant from start to finish. The entire team was great at all stages, everyone gave their all, and no one at any point was really a letdown. Scott McTominay in particular was absolutely fantastic, scoring 7 goals in qualifying. That came from nowhere. Scott McTominay is meant to primarily be a defensive midfielder, and he was probably our best player in qualifying by a mile. So going into Euro 24, this is the provisional squad that Steve Clarke has taken. Now there's obviously 28 players in this squad, the squad can only be 26 players long, so 2 people will miss out. I'm just going to go through the entire squad and give my thoughts on every area. Starting off with the goalkeepers, and Steve Clarke's picked 4 goalkeepers for the provisional squad. This is pretty normal, but there's no way you would take 4 goalkeepers, you'll only take 3. No one can really be unhappy about this. Angus Gunn should probably be our starting goalkeeper. He was number 1 for a Norwich City side which made the championship playoffs this season, so fair play, he's probably deserved that and he was great in qualifying. I would also take Craig Gordon, as he's, got the experience there. He'd be a great head to have around the dressing room, and he's probably still a pretty decent keeper despite his big injury if needed to be called upon. And the third goalkeeper I would take is Zander Clark. He was absolutely brilliant for Hearts this season and kept Craig Gordon out the team. Unfortunately, that means that Liam Kelly will miss out, but someone's got to. Going into the defence, and there's 2 big missing players from this, and that would be Aaron Hickey and Nathan Patterson. It's really unlucky for Steve Clarke that his first choice and second choice right backs, whatever combination of that the 2 of them would be, have both been injured before the tournament. This means that our 2 right backs for the tournament will be Anthony Ralston and Ross McCrory. And look, listen, whilst neither of the 2 of them are as good as Hickey or Patterson, I do think they'll do a job. McCrory's made the move down to the English Championship to play for Bristol City, and Ralston does feature heavily for Celtic. As for centre backs, look, we're not amazing, but we've probably taken the best we can. And at left back, we are unbelievably comfortable. Andy Robertson, Kieran Tierney and Greg Taylor. The fact that Josh Doig doesn't even get in this team shows how good depth we have at left back. Going into the midfield, and this is probably Scotland's strongest area. However, we are missing one of our best players playing in Europe this season in Lewis Ferguson. He's taken an injury before the tournament, and that is really unfortunate for us all. He was just nominated as the best midfielder in Italy and is now being linked with Juventus. However, we'll still have John McGinn and Scott McTominay probably playing further forward with Callum McGregor and Billy Gilmore behind them. That is a very, very, very good midfield. Stuart Armstrong, Ryan Christie, Ryan Jack and Kenny McLean all provide good cover. Now, going into the forwards, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. People are fine to disagree with what I'm going to say, but let's just keep it kind in the comments because there definitely will be some disagreements. The forwards were Shea Adams, Lyndon Dykes and Lauren Shankland. Now look, I'm fine with the 3 of them being called up. The only other strikers we have are maybe Kevin Nisbet or Jacob Brown, and I don't think they should have been called up. Adams had a good season for Southampton, who got promoted. Shankland was probably the best player in Scotland this year that doesn't play for an Old Firm team. And Dykes gives you something totally different and is always good in a Scotland shirt. The 2 players I'm not convinced at were Ben Doak and James Forrest. Ben Doak is only 18 and has only ever played 12 games of professional football in his career. He's never played 90 minutes. I think it was far too soon to be putting him into this. I don't think he ever would have played. Maybe to give you something different, maybe a player late off of the bench, but he's just too young. I don't think it's fair to chuck him in for that. He's definitely going to be part of Steve Clarke's plans after the Euros, but for now it's just too soon. James Forrest, although he had a good end to the season with Celtic, has he done enough to really be called up? Look, Scotland doesn't have a plethora of great players going forward, so I'm not annoyed that Forrest has been called up, but I think there are potentially 2 players out there who I would have called up over Doak and Forrest, because we did decide years ago that Forrest wasn't good enough to be in the team and he hasn't really featured in the past 2-3 years. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, Clarke should be picking players based on merit, not favourites, but has Forrest really done enough? And if that is the case, as I said, there are 2 players I'm going to look at who I would say should be called up over them. Now, in regards to the forward line, Ben Doak has ended up being sent home, supposedly with an injury, and Lyndon Dykes was injured in training. Dykes' injury is very frustrating and irritating, because that now leaves us with 4 players who would be in and around our first team that are all missing for the entire tournament. Now, the 2 people that have been called up to replace them have been Bristol City's Tommy Conway. Nothing wrong with this, he scored 10 goals in the Championship, he's a young player and he looks like someone who could be good for the future. The other player that's been called up is Lewis Morgan. One of the 2 players I referenced earlier, he's currently out applying his trade for New York Red Bulls and has been absolutely phenomenal this season for them. Now, some people won't be happy with Lewis Morgan being called up. I, for one, think it is a better person to be calling up than Ben Doak. He is probably more likely that he should be in the team around this point in time. And the other player I would have called up instead of James Forrest, and yes, they are 2 totally different players, but we don't really play wide anyway. Our width in the team definitely comes from our fullbacks because we typically play 3 centre-backs. The other player I would have called up would have been Ryan Gauld. He's been absolutely phenomenal since going over to Vancouver. Now, I get that a lot of people don't rate the MLS. Steve Clark probably doesn't rate the MLS. That's why these 2 players, despite how well they're doing, basically haven't really touched the squad at all. I mean, we're not blessed with attacking options. But from everything I've seen online, I can't see anything to say that Steve Clark and Ryan Gauld and Lewis Morgan don't get on, so I don't understand how they've struggled to even just make these squads. I'm not saying they should start every game, but the fact that they're never really even in the squads, I just don't understand it, because they are very good players playing out there, and I know the MLS isn't a particularly high level, but we just don't have that many other options. Now, in terms of how I think Scotland will actually do at the tournament, our first game is Germany. It's the host nation. They're on a really good rise under Nagelsmann. The feel around the German national team's been as good as it's been for the past at least 4 or 5 years. Look, they should have too much for us, and realistically we'd be hard pressed to expect to actually win that game. Maybe if luck's on our side we could take a draw, but I would say it's unlikely. Hungary are sort of everyone's dark horses at the moment. They had a really good qualifying campaign and topped their group, but the hardest team they were playing in that group was Serbia, and they have just lost to Ireland. Hungary is a team I can see that will either do really, really well or really, really poorly. So there is a chance we could take something from that game, but we will have to be on good form. Switzerland, however, is a game that I would actually be expecting us to take something from. Switzerland are a team that's kind of always there. They're always in the knockouts, but they've not been as great in recent years. They finished behind Romania in their qualifying group, and a lot of their best players are ageing now. I know Xhaka's just won the league with Bayer Leverkusen, but the Swiss hero Shaqiri, I mean, he's currently out playing in America. And I know I just said about Ryan Gauld and Lewis Morgan, but both of those players are doing better in the MLS than Shaqiri. If Scotland can turn up against Switzerland and take something from the Hungary game, there is a chance, if results go our way, that we could potentially sneak through into the last 16s. There's definitely reason to be optimistic, and Scotland could do it, but we will have to be up for it. However, I would say that's this sort of mini video essay complete. I had a really great time researching and making this video. As an avid supporter of the Scottish national team, it was really good to look back on all these games and see how we got to the tournament. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone that's made it this far into the video. And if you have, please feel free to subscribe, it would really help me out. Equally helpful would be dropping a like on the video if you enjoyed it. But just another thank you to everyone that's watched so far, and I'll see everyone in the next video.